Your Excellencies, distinguished delegates, Secretary General Antonio Guterres, President of the General Assembly, Csaba Kurusi of Hungary. Next year will mark 50 years since the Bahamas became a fully independent sovereign nation. Our ascension to full membership of the United Nations in 1973 was inspired by a recognition of the interdependence of this family of nations and by the hope that dialogue and partnership can be the path to shared solutions. We Bahamians are justifiably, I believe, proud of what we have accomplished in our 50 years of independence. We are free, democratic, entrepreneurial, and resilient, and our small size has not held us back from great achievements at home and on the world stage. But we are ever more aware that many of our greatest challenges emanate from or are made worse by events and conflicts outside of our borders. Hurricane Dorian in 2019 was a Category 5 storm that nearly destroyed 2 of our main islands. It wiped out 30% of our national economic activity. The impact on our economy, on our infrastructure, and on our people is still very much present. The scientific consensus is that as ocean temperatures rise, we can expect hurricanes of greater intensity to arrive with increased frequency. Small island nations, like mine, did not create the emissions that are warming the Earth. But nonetheless, we are on the front line of climate catastrophe. Dorian in 2019 was followed by COVID-19 in 2020. What happens in industrialized countries doesn't stay in industrialized countries. Every year, we welcome millions of visitors to the Bahamas. They are drawn by our country's beauty, culture, and people. But for a long while, visitors could not come. This health crisis quickly became an economic crisis and an education crisis too. Now, as we are working to recover, a global inflation crisis stubbornly endures. It is making the basics of life unaffordable for too many and creating more hardships for our people. The same is true for other countries in the CARICOM region and around the world. And of course, day in and day out, we must also defend our thousands of miles of ocean borders from trafficking in people, drugs, and guns. But we are not waiting for others to act. We are doing what we can to be stronger and to be more prepared. But no one country, large or small, acting alone can stop climate change, nor can we, individually, reduce the threat of future pandemics or end the policies and conflicts driving global inflation, or tackle global criminal networks. These problems require collective action. It was the second Secretary General of the UN, Dag Hammarskjöld, who was candid about the purpose of this organization. The United Nations was not created in order to bring us to heaven, he said, but in order to save us from hell. The UN was born out of the ashes of 2 world wars. Today, we face different threats, ones that require us to mobilize and innovate, and above all, to collaborate. Of all the risks we face, none requires more urgent action than the climate crisis. The first UN climate conference took place in 1992. Yet, despite decades of conferences and meetings featuring warnings from scientists and experts, 1/6 of all the carbon emissions ever, some 407 billion tons, occurred between 2010 and 2020. I have frequently spoken, as have so many others, about the need for action in terms of climate justice and fairness. Why should small island nations like mine, we who have contributed so little to the climate crisis, experience the biggest burdens and risk of a climate-changing world? The argument might be straightforward, but it has not been effective. For a long time, decision makers in both the public and private sectors believed that climate action must come at the expense of economic growth. But now, many are beginning to understand that climate inaction is the most expensive option of all. Taking action is not just in the interests of those of us who are particularly vulnerable, it is in the interest of every country. And it is this enlightened self-interest that should motivate action. The good news is that there are also positive incentives. Transitioning to clean energy is going to create jobs, increase efficiencies, and improve living standards. Again, don't do it for us. Do it for yourselves. I do not believe in despair. I believe in determination and human ingenuity. We can do this. Countries that disagree on many other issues, including important ones, must cooperate on this issue in their own self-interest. We have roughly 40 days until COP27 in Egypt. Let this year be the year that we turn talk into action. Let's roll up our sleeves and get to work. Let those who pledge write the check. Countries like mine, already trapped by billions in climate debt, need funding to transition to renewable energy infrastructures. We have begun to install solar microgrids across our islands, but scaling up will require a lot of additional funding. We in the Bahamas are playing our part. In February and July of this year, we hosted the One Young World regional and annual conferences for young people to support the next generation in their efforts to engage with climate-related issues. This was the first climate conference for young people in the region. We recognize the importance and value of the participation of young people. The Bahamas supports the 2030 Agenda and our common agenda on youth engagement. Then in August, the Bahamas took the lead in bringing together the member countries of the Caribbean to agree a consensus position for negotiations at COP27. We are actively defining ways to protect and safeguard our shallow seas, mangroves, and seagrasses, all of which act as a major carbon sink for the world. We urgently need to build capacity. Now we are inviting those with potential technological solutions to bring their innovations to the Bahamas. Mr. President, it's time for a new resolve and new cooperation. Last year, I brought to the attention of the General Assembly the threat to the financial services industry in the Bahamas and our region. I said then, financial services is a crucial component of the Bahamian economy. We see an indispensable role for the UN in leveraging its universal jurisdiction for greater oversight of global anti-money laundering, de-risking, and tax cooperation matters. Sadly, little to nothing has changed. We continue to struggle to recover from the economic shocks of hurricanes and the COVID-19 pandemic. We also have the additional battle with inflationary pressures created not by us, by the war in Europe. And now, to top it off, we are yet again the victims of inequitable and unjust measures on the part of major economic actors. All these factors place a stranglehold on our national development and that of other small island developing states. Just yesterday, the OECD issued a statement placing the Bahamas on their blacklist. Mr. President, This action is profoundly unfair. When we look at the countries that are flagged as high risk and blacklisted, several startling commonalities emerge. Why is it that European states that operate frameworks akin to that of blacklisted countries are not being even eligible for the inclusion on these lists? Why are all the countries targeted, all of them, small and vulnerable and former colonies of European states? We find it astounding that the $2 to $3 trillion, which is estimated to be laundered each year through the developed countries, are never flagged as causes for concern. And yet my country, which is widely recognized as one of the best regulated countries in the world, and other countries like the Bahamas, are singled out for such reputational attacks. The robust regulatory regimes of our central bank, Securities Commission, and Insurance Commission are chastised on minor details of technical process, while much bigger transgressions in the developed world are ignored. The evidence is mounting that the considerations behind these decisions have less to do with compliance and more to do with the darker issues of prejudged discriminatory perceptions. Let me submit, Black-governed countries also matter. Mr. President, we support the call for reforms in the global financial system to make it more relevant to the needs of today. But those reforms need ambition. They need to go beyond the incremental, and they need to apply to all. For example, the community of international financial institutions are in a position to forgive the debt incurred by the economic shutdowns during the COVID-19 pandemic, and they should do so. Every year that we don't do the right thing to do becomes more expensive. Mr. President, when my neighbors are in crisis, whether the cause is climate or crime or instability, the Bahamas is impacted by the humanitarian and security needs which arise. We repeat once again our opposition to the decades-long embargo and sanctions on Cuba. COVID-19 has exacerbated the situation for the people of Cuba and made existing hardship and deprivation much worse. The people of Haiti continue to suffer. The political vacuum left after the assassination of the president just over a year ago has led to more violence, with the instability fueling more tragedy and threatening the entire region. Migration is not the only issue which the Bahamas is grappling with. We are also struggling from the proliferation of guns. We do not manufacture guns in our country, and yet they illegally find their way to the Bahamas, and within days can be connected to some criminal activity. In an archipelagic nation made up of some 700 islands and keys, range across 100,000 square miles of water, defending our borders is an expensive challenge. We believe more manageable and effective efforts can be made at the source to ensure that a right to bear arms does not so quickly and easily translate into a right to traffic arms. Mr. President, we in the Bahamas believe there is still real purpose in the mission of this United Nations. We will continue to support multilateral efforts to tackle the shared challenges of our time. We congratulate Secretary General Guterres for his leadership in achieving agreement with Ukraine, Russia, and Turkey to get the flow of trade in the Black Sea moving once again. The stabilization in world food markets has helped millions of people in the developing world. We see the involvement and participation of women and young people as inherent and central to our process. My government considers it vital that women play fully active roles in planning and decision-making, both in national and multilateral affairs. We also support the addition of a United Nations Youth Office. The needs and rights of small island developing states cannot be sustained by making policy advances only in times of global shock. We are grateful that the Alliance of Small Island States seized the moment in 2020 to secure the course of work on the Multidimensional Vulnerability Index. We consider this a critical step forward in ensuring greater equity for countries such as the Bahamas. We are aware that the global community is grossly underprepared in securing protections of the global commons that includes water, biodiversity, and the digital landscape. In moving forward on this agenda, we also recognize that a more robust and better change-making architecture is needed across the United Nations. In this respect, we hope that members will support the candidature of our citizen, Stephen Bureau, for the seat of Director of the Telecommunications Development Bureau of the International Telecommunications Union for the term running from 2023 to 2026. Mr. President, by each of us acting out of our own enlightened self-interest, we acknowledge that we ourselves benefit from doing what is in the best interest of all. In meeting the existential challenge posed by the climate crisis, it should be an increasing self-evident truth that none of us can be safe until we are all safe. Thank you.
От имени Ассамблеи хочу поблагодарить премьер-министра и министра финансов Содружества Багамских островов за только что сделанное заявление и прошу службу протокола проводить его, превосходительство.